Hey, good morning and good afternoon, y'all. We're just letting folks come into the room right now, and we'll get started here in about 2 minutes. So just hang out for a couple minutes, and we'll get started shortly. Thanks for joining us, folks. We're going to give it one more minute to let folks trickle in, and then we'll get started on this webinar. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon for this discussion on the power of whole homes repairs, subtitled Affordable Retrofits for a Transformational Future. My name is Patrick Bigger. I'm with the Climate and Community Project and the Sociospatial Climate Collaborative, and I'll be moderating this discussion. What I'll do is give a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about this morning and introduce our speakers. Go over the format a little bit, and then we'll hear from Senator Saval on the power of whole homes repairs. So, in July 2022, Pennsylvania passed the Whole Homes Repairs Act, championed by State Senator Nikil Saval. Whole Homes Repairs is designed to improve housing livability and affordability while preparing state residents for a low-carbon future. The program funds three key interventions: grants for low and moderate income house owners and forgivable loans for small landlords to undertake critical home repairs, accompanied by strong affordability requirements for renters. Second, job training for good careers in home retrofitting. And third, county-level staff to help homeowners navigate the application and contracting process. Senator Saval's Whole Homes Repairs presents a novel solution to two major problems confronting existing home weatherization and retrofitting programs. First, by delivering enough resources upfront to cover major repairs and providing grants that do not impose further financial pressures on cost burden households. And so to hear more about the sort of nuts and bolts of both the bill itself and the process of getting it passed, and then some of the broader big picture issues that home retrofitting seeks to address, we're joined this morning by Pennsylvania State Senator Nikil Saval, who represents the 1st Senate District in the Pennsylvania Legislature, where he serves as Democratic chair of the Senate's Urban Affairs and Housing Committee and chair of the Senate's Philadelphia delegation. His office led the creation of the Whole Homes Repair Program, which establishes a one-stop shop for home repairs and weatherization, which was adopted by the legislature in July. In addition to his legislative work, he's written extensively for the New York Times, the New Yorker, served as co-editor of the literary journal N+1, and he's the author of Cubed, A Secret History of the Workplace that was released in 2014. Next, we've got Emma Boorboor, who is the Community Outreach Director for Senator Nikil Saval, where she runs strategic campaigns, including the successful passage of the Whole Home Repairs Program. Emma brings a decade of professional organizing experience on a range of progressive issues, including climate and gender justice. And finally, Dr. Nick Graetz is a postdoctoral research associate at Princeton's Eviction Lab and also a member of the Climate and Community Project. Nick is a sociologist and demographer whose research focuses on the intersections of housing, climate, structural racism, and population health. So And my name is Patrick Bigger. I'm the research director at the Climate and Community Project, as well as a research policy analyst at the Sociospatial Climate Collaborative at the University of California, Berkeley. A little bit about those two organizations. Climate and Community Project is a progressive climate policy think tank that mobilizes a network of 40 plus experts to produce cutting edge scholarly research to assist in designing and winning our generation's determining suite of policy interventions. We advance bold ideas to decarbonize the built environment, reorder systems of political power, and embolden a multiracial working class. While the Sociospatial Climate Collaborative, or SC2, is a hub for critical social science research on the climate emergency, again, based at Berkeley. So with that all in mind, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. We'll be collecting those throughout, and we'll also have time for some Q&A towards the end of the program. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Saval to talk us through whole homes repair.
Terrific. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, CCP, for pulling this together. Special thanks to Daniel Donnett-Cohen for prompting this, and Johanna Puzua for pulling it together. So again, Nikil Saval, I represent the people, communities, and lands of Pennsylvania's 1st senatorial district, which runs through the heart of Philadelphia. I'm going to talk about where the idea for the Whole Home Repairs Program came from and how the program works. So the Whole Home Repairs Program is meant to establish local one-stop shops for home repairs and weatherization, while also building out our local workforce and adding new family-sustaining jobs in a growing field. It is the first of its kind in the nation, and it will make it so Pennsylvanians can stay warm, safe, and dry in homes that they can afford. Next slide, please. So this, as you can see from this slide, Pennsylvania has some of the oldest housing stock in the nation. Across the state, we have hundreds of thousands of homes with moderate to severe physical inadequacies. In May, we conducted a survey supported by Data for Progress and People's Action, which found that 1 in 4 Pennsylvania voters lives in a home that needs a critical repair. Families that can't afford repairs are either stuck living in unsafe conditions or eventually forced out of their home. In urban areas, this is often when speculators come in and pressure sales for far less than what the property is worth. These homes are then flipped, and this worsens the housing affordability crisis, and a cycle of gentrification and displacement ensues in a neighborhood. In rural areas, the same set of deferred maintenance issues can lead to abandonment and blight. Deferred maintenance can also result in homes with energy inefficiencies, which impose utility burdens on communities that can least afford them, and in turn contribute to building emissions that fuel the climate crisis. In Philadelphia, low-income households spend an average of 23% of their household's income on utilities alone, while 1 in 3 Pennsylvania voters, again from that same poll from Data for Progress, report that their utility bills are, quote, unaffordable. Next slide, please. At the same time, our housing crisis is compounded by our climate crisis. By mid-century, Pennsylvania's average annual temperature is expected to rise 6 degrees Fahrenheit. Annual precipitation in our state is expected to increase 8% in that same time period, with extreme rainfall events projected to increase in magnitude, frequency, and intensity. This hotter and wetter weather will continue to accelerate the deterioration of our aging housing stock under conditions that these homes were never designed to withstand. Next slide, please. Before my office even opened, I knew that I needed to work at the intersection of the housing crisis and the climate crisis, and that retrofitting our aging housing stock stood out as a solution at this nexus. So over the first 2 years of being in office, we held 3 separate policy hearings on Pennsylvania's housing crisis. And in each, we worked to ensure that the voices and experiences of Pennsylvania residents were centered. This is one such resident, you can see on the left, Alicia Cruz, a Lancaster resident, who spoke about several issues in, I believe, what was rental housing. And underlying so many of the testimonies that we heard was the fact that people's homes, regardless of whether they rented or owned, were unsafe. In some instances, residents shared that they had nowhere to turn. In other words, they couldn't go from their unsafe housing to their family members' family members' housing because their family members also had unsafe housing. So it just was a compounded crisis. And what do I mean by unsafe? That really means lead paint, unremediated lead paint, which can sicken children, the lack of adequate heat, even in the dead of winter, water damage from burst pipes or leaky roofs and windows, which can cause mold, not being able to adapt to your home due to a disability or changing physical needs, and finally, exorbitant utility burdens. This is true, we learned, across urban and rural parts of the state. We learned that there are some programs residents can reach out to for help, like the Federal Weatherization Assistance Program, but too often weatherization assistance is stymied. Someone can get to a house and see that there is a bigger structural problem that needs to be fixed first. But if you reached out for weatherization assistance because you can't afford repairs, you're just sort of stuck in the same spot. It's clear, based on all our work and research, that we needed a more holistic approach to home repairs. Next slide, please. So we came up with the whole home repairs program to build on existing federal, state, and local home repair and weatherization programs to fill three main gaps that were identified by practitioners. One is funding for home repairs, two is coordination and technical assistance, and three is workforce development. And I'll go through each of those in turn. So one, funding for repairs. In statute, the whole home repairs program provides up to $50,000 of repair work in the form of a grant for homeowners and up to the same amount in the form of a forgivable loan to small landlords with affordability restrictions so that they can make habitability repairs and upgrades for energy efficiency and accessibility. In practice, in some counties in Pennsylvania, they will be spending less than $50,000 per home, but as a result, serving more households. Number two, coordination and technical assistance. The Whole Home Repairs Program allocates resources for support staff to ensure that eligible applicants are accessing the right programs in the right order to meet their needs and maximize their access to holistic repairs. So in other words, going back to that weatherization example, we could have county level staff that could help people get access to home repairs and then in turn help them access federal weatherization assistance if they're eligible. Finally, Whole Home Repairs funds workforce development. We heard from practitioners of existing home repair programs that we could put money towards home repairs, but even if we did, there wouldn't be enough skilled workers to do the repairs at scale. So the program provides resources to increase retention in home repair and weatherization training programs and pre-apprenticeship programs, including the provision of cash stipends to trainees, so that our state can build up the workforce needed to meet the demand and keep our skilled workers and the jobs they do local. Next slide, please. This is a program, it's important to underscore, for homeowners and renters alike. Homeowners can apply for repair work for up to $50,000, and small landlords, which we define as owning no more than 15 rental units across no more than 5 properties, can apply for the same amount in the form of a forgivable loan with affordability restrictions for each unit that they rent. The Whole Home Repairs Program also encourages landlords to accept housing choice vouchers, which we expect to have the effect of supporting, retaining, and potentially increasing the amount of affordable housing in a region. The Whole Home Repairs Program is many things. It's a housing security initiative, it's an energy initiative, it is an anti-blight and displacement initiative, it is a jobs initiative, and it is a community safety initiative. And I'm very proud to say, as we've heard, that the program passed last year in the state budget with an appropriation of $125 million. Next slide, please. My community outreach director, Emma Boorboor, who's on this call, will speak more to how we won Whole Home Repairs in a moment, but I will note that this was a bipartisan effort, and it was bipartisan without compromising really any part of the program. Housing insecurity transcends geography, and of course, it transcends political affiliation. When we began to have conversations about this program with legislators interested in housing, we learned that they were aware of this issue, were concerned about its effects on their constituents, and in some instances had been working on it for years. In my urban district in Philadelphia, communities are concerned about displacement and gentrification. In more rural districts, communities are concerned about abandonment and blight. And the trigger for all these problems is a lack of ability to repair and maintain one's home. So the quote here from Senator David Argall is a Republican who represents a rural and in some ways deindustrialized or kind of coal communities that have seen a lot of abandonment. And he thought that this was a major way to intervene, as you can see here, in that cycle and stop abandonment before it happens. Next slide, please. So what's happening now is that at the state level in Pennsylvania, this program is being administered by the Department of Community and Economic Development, which set up a process to select county administrators. The county administrators make grants to residents, help people access the assistance they need in the order they need it, and support training and pre-apprenticeship programs. We've seen nearly universal demand from the counties for this program. 64 out of 67 counties, covering nearly 99% of the state's population, applied for program funding. Almost all of the funding has been distributed to the counties. Right now, county administrators are in the process of setting up this new program, and a few counties have already opened up their application process, and we expect all the counties to be open by this summer. Next slide, please. Our work now is to ensure the smooth implementation of the program and to continue the campaign for it. We won $125 million to create and launch whole home repairs, which is an unprecedented win for housing in our state's General Assembly. It took a lot of people power and a strategic inside-outside campaign to make this happen. At the same time, we know the need is enormous and the demand is quickly going to outpace available funding. That $125 million is one-time money from the American Rescue Plan. For example, Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is, just opened Tuesday. They're expecting 3,000 applications in the first week, but only have funding to serve about 200 homes. Lehigh County, where Allentown is located, already opened and closed their applications because demand was so high. The money we won allows us to set up this new program, but we need to fight for recurring funding so that we can meet the enormity of the need statewide. That's going to take even more people power. Our organizing coalition continues to meet weekly with the goal of securing a recurring sustainable source of funding for the program in this year's budget. If this program receives continued investment at the amount that we're working for, in 5 years, we will have repaired 50,000 homes across Pennsylvania. That's 50,000 families or seniors that can stay safely in their homes. We will have done more homes. We will be doing more homes at scale in conjunction with the Pennsylvania building trades. We're already bought in with the training aspect of the program. Pennsylvania will be increasing its number of green jobs at a fast rate that meets its potential as a leader in the green economy. And by year 5, we're seeing work done in homes by the people who received pre-apprenticeship and job support from year 1. Lastly, we've also seen interest from other states and even at the national level to replicate whole homes repairs, which might include some people on this call right now. And we'd be happy to work with anyone to support passing whole home repairs in your state. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Saval. And just a note on housekeeping, chat is disabled, but we've got the Q&A open. So please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A and I'll be collating them for folks to answer after we hear from all of our panelists. And next we are going to hear from Emma Boorboor to hear more about the organizing and the coalition that made Whole Homes Repair possible.
Thanks, Patrick. Hey, everyone. My name is Emma Boorboor. I'm the Community Outreach Director for Senator Saval. I essentially function as the organizer for our office. I work with movement organizations and advocates to build the coalitional power needed to pass our legislative agenda. So today I'm going to talk about how we won whole home repairs and hopefully pass on some lessons that you can use in your state. You can go to the next slide. So a lot of the work of passing whole home repairs happened before the bill was even introduced. So that work included picking a strategic issue, drafting and vetting the policy, and forming the coalition. As Senator Saval mentioned, we set out to work at the intersection of the two biggest challenges facing our state, the housing crisis and the climate crisis. Both had seen very little action from the General Assembly, and we felt an urgency to change that. I think we also felt our movement partners coalescing at this intersection. The environmental movement in particular has shifted its focus in recent years to infrastructure like housing, because this is where the impact of climate change is felt, and it's also where we can tangibly see the vision of a different future. At the same time, COVID had really put a spotlight on housing insecurity, and progressive organizations we saw were making it more of a priority. So by moving in that direction, and then by honing in on home repairs specifically, we had an issue that excited our base, and at the same time, we had an issue that was a material need across urban and rural parts of the state, and that was an issue that wasn't already polarized. Once we had that direction of home repairs, we went through an extensive development and vetting process. So we held multiple rounds of one-on-one and group meetings with housing advocates, energy efficiency and home repair practitioners, and community organizations. So, in the first round, we identified gaps. We talked through gaps in existing infrastructure. We talked through possible solutions, and then we came back to folks with the general concept. And then there was like third and fourth rounds of actually reviewing and editing the draft legislation. And I think this drafting process, resulted in the best version of the legislation, but it was also how we built buy-in and trust of dozens of organizations and formed a large and diverse coalition. You can go to the next slide. So by making sure we had this buy-in of a large coalition before even introducing the bill, we were able to plan for a really impactful launch of the campaign. So we worked with groups like PA Stands Up, Make the Road, PA, Power, Interfaith, and Sunrise Movement to plan a week of action to launch the bill. By doing actions in multiple places across the state, we were able to generate media coverage that raised the profile of the bill and started to build some buzz in Harrisburg. And then at the same time, we had a tireless champion on the inside in Senator Saval. He was, cornering Republicans on the floor and actually got Republican Senator Pat Brown on the bill at introduction, and several others followed him. And I think, through these conversations with Republicans, Senator Saval spoke a little bit about this. We learned that some had been working on this issue for a while, and they were really specifically focused on this issue of blight. And we were, able to use that shared language with them. And then from there, our coalition was in constant communication and planning next steps together. From our position inside the Capitol, we helped identify champions that outside groups could celebrate and targets that they needed to put pressure on. We coordinated lobby days, calls, and postcards to the legislature and to the governor. We planned hearings in a rural county with our counterpart on the Urban Affairs and Housing Coalition Committee, and planned a rally at the Capitol. So through this huge show of people power, coordinated with our inside advocacy, we generated the political will that was necessary to make whole home repairs a priority during budget negotiations, and we won. You can go to the next slide. Just to speak to the mechanics of how it happened in the legislature, we introduced the Whole Home Repairs Act, SB 1 through 5, as a marker bill to get the policy idea out there. We didn't include an appropriation in that original bill, and we think that that helped us have folks just engage with the policy when it first came out, and we think it helped getting the Republican Appropriations Chair Pat Brown on the bill. Ultimately, it didn't pass as a standalone bill. The program was actually created as part of the budget package. So we got a condensed version of the program language from our bill added into the fiscal code. And then we were able to capitalize on the huge opportunity that was provided by the availability of American Rescue Plan funding to get an appropriation in the state budget of $125 million. And, we definitely can't underestimate how the availability of that federal funding really made this possible. You can go to the next slide. So there were a lot of factors that contributed to our success, but to wrap up, I'm going to pull out 3 key elements that helped us get whole home repairs over the finish line. The first one is that we practice very deliberate, principled organizing at each step of the way. We power mapped, we did one-on-ones, we took the time to build a collaborative coalition that really trusted us and each other. And we talked to everyone, that, like I said, he was cornering Republicans on the floor. We never assumed the answer was no before we made the ask. And we didn't, and we also didn't take no as an answer. We kept going if it was a no. The second thing I'd pull out, which I started to say up top, is we identified an issue that activated and excited our base while simultaneously being a winnable policy issue in the short term. So I think it's this is a tough but important balance to strike. Our movement partners are the engine that drive the outside pressure that made something that, allowed us to break through the status quo and make something happen. So they need to be fired up. But we also, we're in a Republican controlled legislature. So we also needed Republican support to move the program. And I think the key was following Green New Deal principles to carve out a relatively narrow issue that met like an easily understood material need. And then the third one, it's kind of connected to the previous point, is we practiced organizational and messaging discipline, because we needed to pass this through a legislature that puts up billboards like the one you see in this slide. This is on the highway going in and out of Harrisburg. So we never used Green New Deal in our messaging to the public and to legislators. We made deliberate decision, just talk about what the program did and how it would do it. And we even, worked in some of that language from Republicans around blight. But I think this really connects to the trust that we built with our coalition. They were bought into the fact that this was a Green New Deal policy, even though we weren't saying it in our external messaging. So that's my overview of how we did it, and I'm excited to take some questions after the panel is done.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. Just monitoring the Q&A, I'm seeing some themes arise. So if any of the panelists want to start thinking about the use of IRA funds in either continuing to fund Pennsylvania's program, or how organizers in other states could think about IRA funding. That's one thing that's coming up. And another one is asking about the role of organized labor in building the Whole Homes Repair Coalition. So that's something that maybe we can return to during Q&A. Before we get there, I'm going to turn it over to...
You muted yourself.
Yeah, I did. I'm so sorry about that. 3 years of practice and I'm still messing it up. Anyway, this is Dr. Nick Graetz, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the more conceptual challenges that Whole Homes Repair contributes to solving.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some research we did early on in thinking about the Whole Homes program with Senator Saval, especially the potential impacts across the state. We were really interested in looking across both urban and rural communities in PA and thinking about benefits for both homeowners and renters. And then I'm just going to touch on what I see as a couple really big benefits of the program above and beyond the actual repairs themselves, which is how the program can create better health outcomes and greater housing stability in the state. Next slide. So we know the big picture across the state of Pennsylvania, which is that 1 in 3 households had utility costs last year that were unaffordable. But we also want to unpack and think about the geographic distribution of the problem. This map shows the proportion of people with unaffordable utility costs last year. And there are a few things I wanted to note here. First, we see huge hotspots in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which in large part is driven by stagnant wages and extremely old housing stock there. The majority of households are spending over 6% of their annual income on utilities, which is a typical threshold used to define energy insecurity. According to a report published by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, the repairs needed across the Philly metro area alone could exceed $2.7 billion to complete. And in Philly, about 37% of owner-occupied homes needed repairs last year compared to 41% of renter-occupied homes. But I think really importantly, this map shows us that energy insecurity in Pennsylvania is not just an urban problem concentrated in places like Philly and Pittsburgh. And I think this is a big reason why the Whole Homes program has bipartisan support, is that across the state, families are struggling to cover rising utility costs and necessary repairs for aging housing. And while energy insecurity, as we see here, is a bit lower in the larger suburbs of Philly and Pittsburgh, mostly driven by higher incomes there. We see that across most of the state, around 40% of households are struggling to pay their energy bills. And as was mentioned, polling shows that a huge chunk of Pennsylvania voters who are homeowners would struggle today to pay for a critical repair. Next slide. This chart just breaks that down into the proportion of people living in the typical neighborhood that are energy burdened across these urban-rural categories on the bottom, stretching from large central metros like Philly on the left to the most rural counties in Pennsylvania on the right. And as we saw on the map again, the crisis of energy insecurity and utility bills is not just an urban problem, but it's really affecting most families across the state. Next slide. A lot of the issues regarding energy insecurity and needed repairs, as has come up for both owners and renters, are related to the age of homes. So here we're looking at the proportion of people who are energy insecure and living in a home built before 1990. Weatherizing older homes and addressing home repairs like fixing broken roofs, floors, and windows. These are investments that would strengthen existing housing stock to better withstand more frequent storms, flooding, and heat across the state. This will also reduce future energy use, which has impacts on climate change. We know that home energy use accounts for a large proportion of indirect emissions, especially resulting from electricity use. Next slide. So I think the Whole Homes program is really coming at a super necessary time for families across Pennsylvania dealing with aging housing, energy insecurity, and needed repairs. There are some important benefits of the program beyond simply repairs I wanted to touch on here. And the first is how the program can affect health outcomes in a holistic way, both directly and indirectly. Across the US, nearly 6 million households live with moderate to severe housing hazards. And that includes things like lead paint, water intrusion, injury and safety risk, electricity deficiencies. And again, this is especially true in our state. So we can think about 3 ways in which the Whole Homes program can improve the health of folks in Pennsylvania. The first is reducing exposure to immediate health risks like those I just mentioned, for example, lead and mold. But the second is just putting money back in people's pockets. We know that energy insecure households prioritize really high utility payments at the expense of other essential spending, such as food and preventative health care. And then third, this program helps people stay in their homes over the long term, which can have big health benefits, especially at older ages. Not being able to complete necessary repairs not only creates dangerous and unhealthy conditions, but also might push longtime homeowners into foreclosure and prevent seniors from aging in their homes. Next slide, please. So this relates to the other big benefit that we've kind of been talking about, which is housing stability more broadly. During the financial crisis induced by the COVID-19 pandemic, housing costs have only gotten worse. Last year, 19% of homeowners and 48% of renters in Pennsylvania had high housing cost burdens, spending over 30% of their income on housing. And currently, economic swings create costs that are pushed onto individual homeowners and renters in ways that reproduce existing inequality. Often rising supply chain and labor costs are passed through to homeowners who might need a critical repair or cause landlords to defer needed maintenance. And we know that it's typically much more cost efficient to maintain existing housing rather than create new housing. But it's also crucial for allowing people to keep their homes over their lives and keep them in the family. And here again, this interacts with existing inequality, especially racial gaps in wealth and savings that are the result of historical and contemporary racism, often enacted through the housing market. There are a lot of folks who don't have rainy day funds for necessary home repairs. And we know that low-income homeowners will often be pressured to sell because they can't afford to get the work done on their homes. And there are real estate investors waiting, often living outside the city or state, looking to buy these vulnerable properties on a cheap deal. And so making housing repairs would help those targeted with offers by property developers and help more people stay in their homes, which is a strong preference for many senior folks across Pennsylvania who are living on fixed incomes. So to summarize, when we push all of these costs onto individual homeowners, we risk reproducing existing racial inequality in housing conditions and stability. Buildings age, and the inability to keep up with repairs leads to devaluation, loss of wealth, and the risk of displacement. And I think what the Whole Homes program takes very seriously is the idea that people shouldn't be displaced from their homes because they can't afford basic repairs, which are often the result of bigger structural forces, such as climate change and aging housing and energy systems broadly. Next slide, please. Last, while there are certainly some aspects of these problems that we've mentioned that are unique to Pennsylvania, the broader issues here are affecting Americans across the country. This chart, also produced by the Philadelphia Fed, breaks down how much money the average home in the US needs for repairs. And we can see that across the country, about 36% of homes need repairs, and this is especially true of renter-occupied homes. And the vast majority of these households need less than $5,000 for some really critical repairs. And so the need for a whole homes program is really widespread across the country. And it would be awesome to use this program as a model for other states, while working to ensure successful implementation in Pennsylvania. That's it for me, and I'll turn it back over to Patrick.
Great. Thank you, Nick. And thank you to all our panelists for being so concise in their comments. And now we actually have more time for Q&A than we initially thought, which I think is a pretty rare thing to happen. So congratulations to you all on that. Before we move to audience questions, I wanted to sort of work through some things that we've been thinking about at the Climate and Community Project that I think would be useful for folks in the audience to hear also maybe. And so I'll start with Senator Saval and ask about what's happening with implementation of whole homes repair. What are some of the biggest challenges to implementation? And this is something that a lot of us are thinking a lot about right now in terms of the IRA also. And so what are some of the stumbling blocks that you all have encountered, and some of the challenges to achieving recurring appropriations to really maximize the potential of whole homes repair?
Yeah, so we are, I would say that we're, just to be clear, we're in the stage where most of the counties, virtually all of the money has been distributed. The county administrators are currently have set up, some have, I think I mentioned that one county has open and closed applications, and another, others are kind of in the process of accepting them or setting up the systems to accept them. So, overall, I think we, you have it. I think that the largest challenge is the money itself, right? That we have a large, appropriation, larger than the state has ever contributed, right, to this initiative. Which nonetheless only begins to meet the need. So we're going to have, the program received a lot of attention. There are a lot of people who are excited about the program. There are people who are excited to apply, and frankly, most people are not going to get served by the program. So we're going to immediately have wait lists. I believe that Allegheny County processed somewhere around 600 applications yesterday. The program, not yesterday, I'm sorry, Tuesday. Program opened Tuesday, and they processed 600 applications in a single day. And we know that the number of homes they're able to do is somewhere closer to like 250 or 200 or 250. So setting expectations is a difficult issue at the same, when you are excited about a program, but nonetheless have to kind of set expectations in terms of how much can be done. That nonetheless also creates a correlate where the clear amount of demand creates a clear organizing potential or campaign potential for asking for more, right? The demand far exceeds the supply of money, and so we can ask for more. Another thing that'll be, I would say, is a more interesting question, and is just the variation in implementation across counties. It is not being kind of centrally. There's things in statute. There are things that counties have to do, but nonetheless, each county has its own sort of like infrastructure that is more or less advanced. So Philly and Pittsburgh actually have done some version of home repairs and weatherization for a long time. And so in some ways are just kind of scaling up what they're able to do. Other places may be doing things for the first time or clearing their weatherization wait list. So how the variation across counties is, and this will sort of see how this plays out, is going to be interesting, I think. And trying to make implementation maybe more uniform, maybe a question that we bring into next year. There's going to be some lessons to learn on that front, but we don't know that yet, and so I'd say that those are two kind of interesting questions that are coming up in implementation. I don't know, Emma, if there's anything else that.
No, that's great. Maybe while you're on mic, if you could say anything about potential that you see from different IRA funding streams, or if that's something that y'all are looking at as a way of continuing to fund whole homes repair.
So yeah, it is early stages for grappling with that question. At the same time, we're very excited about it. We certainly brought in early conversations with all the new we have a new administration, we want to clarify, in Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, new cabinet members, and of course the IRA, which postdates the passage of this program. And so wanting to be able to pair, or layer on, the rebates or tax credits for high efficiency appliances, electric appliances, and heat pumps and the like. A lot of that is something that we're certainly excited about the potential of doing. Again, I think this is some of that may be happening at a state level. We know that there's work to apply to, I believe it's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I could be getting that name slightly wrong. But a lot of that work will also be done on a county level, on a county assistance level. So Philly, for example, wanting to ensure that while you're applying for home repairs, we're also setting you up as to get a new appliance, a new heat pump, etc. So I think that's we've been encouraging that kind of collaboration, but in a way it's early to say that it is happening actively. And I think a lot of what we would be seeing is happening on a county level. But I think there's more to be done. And I know that the Department of Environmental Protection has hired a federal, or has someone who's specifically involved in kind of coordinating federal assistance. So I think there's going to be more that we see coming forward, but there's nothing programmatic, I should say.
Gotcha. Great. Go ahead, Anna.
One thing I would add, I think for the flexibility of funding that whole home repairs has, I think we'll need a state, a base of state funding as well, and then the rebates would be something that gets like coordinated with that. And the whole home repairs program is set up to coordinate with multiple home repair programs and sources of funding.
Great, thanks for that, Senator Saval, and thanks for clarifying, Emma. And Emma, maybe to turn to you about how the sort of idea of whole homes repair is spreading to other states who you've been hearing from. I know there was an attempt to get it passed this year in Maryland. Where else are you seeing interest in energy and excitement about whole homes repair?
Yeah, we had, I don't have it in front. We had a slide that had all the states that we got outreach from. It was like, it's a lot. I remember having a conversation with the minority leader in Wisconsin. We've talked to folks in Washington State. We definitely talked to folks in Maryland, like you mentioned. We talked to folks in New York. There's a bunch, I'm forgetting some, but we pretty almost immediately after the passage, we were getting outreach from other states.
It's really exciting. Maybe one thing that I'm curious about and that's come up in the chat is thinking about what kind of groups with what kind of foci have been reaching out, and both in the genesis of whole homes repair. Did it start with the climate movement or start with the housing movement? Or is it housing folks who are predominantly interested in other states? Is it climate folks? And maybe also this is a good place to bring in the labor edge also and ask about how you engaged with the trades and what parts they're most excited about.
Do you want to take that?
I'll handle the kind of going backwards to some of the labor parts of it. So we engaged the Pennsylvania building trades, but also I should say actually a full spectrum of organized labor early on, in part because there are actually many different ways into this, but just focusing on the building trades front, we in part just to kind of develop the workforce component, we wanted to understand how their training models worked and how this might kind of help the model that they've set up. And so what is happening actively, so the building trades, I think, much of this kind of residential or scattered site repair work is not usually done by union labor, and in fact, much of the residential market outside of large multifamily buildings is not done is non-union largely. But I think there is an interest in involving more union work in residential construction and repair. And in particular, what we see, and I think what the building trades certainly see, is over time the possibility of doing this work at scale, of doing blocks of houses where a kind of batch would actually be attractive to a contract of that kind. So that, I mean, they've definitely been interested in that potential possibility, and I think see that as like a future for this program. They've also, but very much some, for example, in Philadelphia, some of the training dollars are going to a union training center. For some labor, for some folks who are in the building trades, this is also work that you can do when you're in between jobs as well as residential home repair and work. So for all those reasons, there's a kind of broad support for the training aspect, and for the eventual possible hope of being more involved in the actual repair work from the building trades. But I should say that, for example, we got a lot of support from unions representing home healthcare aides, SEIU healthcare, in part because doing adaptive modifications in a home makes it much easier for home healthcare aides to do their work. So there's a lot of ways that organized labor has found their way into the work, even though it's not directly employing their members.
And to your first question, I'll say some of the outreach has been directly from legislators in other states, and then there's been a mix of, I think it's a mix of housing and climate groups, probably more climate groups in other states, just because I think probably there's climate groups have more organizing infrastructure than housing organizations, is my general sense, and then also like multi-issue progressive organizations like People's Action. And then the other thing I want to mention is a huge engine of our campaign was actually from immigrant rights organizations like Make the Road, because they housing just bubbled up as the top issue for their members, and so they dedicated a lot of time and people power to the campaign.
Awesome, thank you for that, Emma. Let's go to Nick and maybe think a little bit more about some of the structural ramifications of whole homes repair and repair in general. And so, Nick, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how this program and other investments in housing can help, potentially close racial wealth gaps, achieve better racial equity, and also help prepare for the impacts of climate change. I think you kind of got at all those in your presentation. I'm wondering if you want to just sort of reflect on that big picture question a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a super important question to think about. I think we can think about how it helps renters and homeowners. I think finding ways to help renters without displacing them. And I think the program takes that very seriously. How can we help reduce things like utility costs, which get passed through to renters, while ensuring long-term affordability requirements, as much as possible for small landlords who receive loans. I think that's really important for affecting things like the amount of disposable income people have and the ability to save money. And then for homeowners, their house is their biggest asset, but there's huge variation in housing conditions like we've all been talking about. And I think it's important to help homeowners keep their homes and avoid things like predatory potential buyers who are looking to flip them, which can be especially important when thinking about replicating the program in other states that are even more heavily targeted by that kind of outside real estate investment.
Great, thanks, Nick. There's a sort of class of questions that are coming up that I think I'd throw this open to all of y'all that has to do with some of the terminology you use in framing the intervention of whole homes repair. First, there's a question about the sort of difference between repair and retrofitting and why you decided to go with the sort of framework of repair versus maybe a more technical understanding of retrofits. And then there's also the question about, the category of blight and, that being maybe a risky term to mobilize, and sort of how you sort of strategically engage with that, both with Republicans and then with your coalition, and sort of navigated some of the pitfalls of that term. So repair versus retrofit on the one hand, blight on the other.
I'll speak to the blight question. I think I can speak to both, but I'll just, it is an interesting question. So, I mean, they, just to be clear, I mean, from the context, I mean, as a living in Philadelphia as a student of urban history, and blight is obviously an extremely charged word. It has in the history of urban renewal, it has a clear racial connotation in terms of neighborhoods that were targeted, were blighted, and were overwhelmingly Black and brown neighborhoods for so-called slum clearance and the like. But in the Pennsylvania legislature, in rural areas, there was there was a blight task force that was already extant, that had been working for several years, that was specifically focused on coal communities or former coal communities, on areas where the term was used specifically for abandonment or properties that were dilapidated. And so in a way, we were entering into a terminology that was understandable to some of our to our Republican colleagues, and so they saw whole home repairs as sort of intervening I believe this was their terminology, but a blight cycle, and arresting it. So in a way, we were trying to find a shared language in order to speak about a crisis that maybe wasn't spoken about in the same way in every area. So the terminology of blight in sort of those rural areas was one that was recognizable to colleagues who were working on the issue for a long time in Pennsylvania, again, overwhelmingly in kind of rural and Republican led areas.
Yeah, I think there was definitely some code switching that was going on. We wouldn't use, that wasn't the language that would motivate members of these organizations or used internally. So we'd use different language to motivate folks, and then in scripts to Republican legislators, we would use the term blight, or in lobby meetings, we would use the term blight. And I don't think anyone's asked us the question about retrofit versus repairs. I mean, I think I'm curious what the senator would say about this, but I think repair is just a more colloquial term. So I think we use that in our public messaging. I think I think retrofit is also more associated with the green, the weatherization and energy efficiency parts of the repairs. And we were also talking about structural basic systems of the home repairs, and those aren't always referred to as retrofit. So that's my thinking on that one. I don't know if the senator has anything else on that.
No, I agree. Yeah. And that was that. It's true. It had never, it felt more comprehensive in a way and recognizable to talk about repairs. But I should say the origin of at least personally, of the idea of trying to do this program was an idea that I talked about in a campaign setting, and Daniel Aldana Cohen, who was associated with CCP, was sociologist at Berkeley, we and I had helped come up with for a large scale retrofit program. So it does have that kind of area, at least in my prior to assuming office.
Great, thanks for that, Senator Saval and Emma. While we still have time, there's a number of sort of nutsy boltsy implementation questions in the chat, and I'm wondering if there's a sort of comprehensive website that folks can visit to learn more about, how implementation is going, things on income requirements, things about how counties are setting up their sort of prioritization standards, these kinds of questions that folks in other states who are looking to advocate for their own version of whole homes repair, where they can see how this is being rolled out. Maybe also anything that you have to add about the jobs training side of whole homes repair, which I think we've covered a little bit in less detail than some of the other components, and sort of how you envision that rolling out.
Yeah, so the we did make an intentional choice to have this be a flexible program that counties could implement with the the natural leader in the county could implement the program. But what that means is that the program is being implemented slightly differently in every county in Pennsylvania. So there's no like central website that you can go to that's like, here's how it's happening in every county in Pennsylvania. I think what I would I think Allegheny County is going to be a model of whole home repairs. So I would encourage folks to check out their Allegheny County's website. I can look that up and send that over. Some quick things in the weeds to know are income eligibility state in statute is set at no more than 80% of area median income. Some counties are setting it a little bit lower. At like in Philadelphia, they're doing 60% of area median income. I saw a question in the chat about will manufactured homes be covered. That is in the program guidelines. They define homeowners to include manufactured housing. Trying to think about what else to cover that can be said for the whole state. Because there was questions about prioritization that is being or like how applicants will be selected. That is at the discretion of the county administrators to determine.
And Emma, maybe just real quick, one more detail. Can you talk just real quickly about the tenant protections that whole homes repair includes?
Yeah, so essentially it's set up as a forgivable loan if a set of affordability restrictions are met over the course of 15 years, then it becomes then the loan is forgivable. So those include not raising the rent more than 3% each year. There's a period of time where the tenant has the first right to renew the lease. They have to maintain the home at they can't have any major code violations, so they have to be maintaining the quality of the housing. I think those are the main ones.
And just to underscore that the availability of that funding and these basically we think we'll see, of course, but offers a potential resource for tenant advocates, that there is for people for properties where there are deferred maintenance issues and the like, there is something that tenant advocates can point to, which is like, well, there is access, at least in theory, to the whole home repairs program funding for you to be able to do this and not unduly raise your rents and things like that. And you can visit wholehomerepairs.com, I think, like that will take you to the state website, which is convenient and also help you direct you to it. You can access the guidelines and all those things. But yeah, that will and it'll tell you who's administering in the various counties and things like that.
Great. So that is wholehomerepair.com.
Yeah, whole home repairs.
Whole home repair. Right.
It turns out in Pittsburgh they love to say whole homes repairs and variation. But yeah, wholehomerepairs.com.
Great. Well, then with that, I will say thank you to Senator Saval, Emma, and Nick for being such helpful panelists. I hope that y'all all got a lot out of it. I'd like to also thank my colleague, our policy director, Batul Hassan, who's been running the technology in the background and making this run smoothly. And we really appreciate y'all joining us this afternoon. If you've got further questions or if you want to talk to us or other folks interested in whole home repair in other states, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to hear what y'all are thinking about too. So once again, appreciate your time, everyone, and onward and upward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.